Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of the Ordinary Sacred, and this is my 6th video about my own IFS self-therapy. And this one is going to be about meeting an inner critic. And really quickly, I want to give my 2 disclaimers. One is that this is my own work. It's not meant to be prescriptive for you. Your experience may look very different than mine, and that's okay. The second one is that when I begin telling about this work, I'm at the stage where I'm already in self as I'm approaching the parts. So there may be a stage ahead of that you may need to do as far as assessing how you feel toward the part and seeing if you can ask any parts that have concern, maybe meet their concerns, or if they're afraid or judgmental or distracted, if they'll just give you space to approach the part with openness and curiosity and presence. So that's where I'm starting from here. All right, so this one I call Gertrude / Edna and the 10-year-old. So I knew, I had diagnosed myself as an Enneagram 1, which is known as the perfectionist. And so at this point, I knew that I had a very strong inner critic inside of me that talked to me all day long. And so I thought it would be a good idea to get to know her. Now, I had gone to an Enneagram conference where the teacher had talked about someone's inner critic and how they had named them Gertrude. This was before I met IFS. So I was already calling my inner critic Gertrude. I just took on the same name that the other person had. And so I thought, it might be a good idea to get to know this Gertrude. So I connected to self and asked any parts that, felt frustrated with this critic, if they would give me space. And so I felt very curious and open toward Gertrude. And so I asked her to show herself to me. And I'm visual, so I saw an image of an old hunchback woman. She was short with white hair and a big hat, a big nose, and glasses. She was very old. And I just said, "What do you want me to know about you?" That's a good question to start with. And then I just observed her, and she was kind of wagging her finger like this. And she said, "I know the right way to do things. I'll protect you. You just have to follow me. I've lived a long time. I've been a student of life. Trust me, I know the right way." And I said, "So how do I know when it's you that's with me or talking to me?" And she said, "Because I prod you with pangs of guilt and the pain of shame. I do this to keep you on the right path." And so I understood that her intention, even though other parts felt like it was harmful and frustrating, that she would use these tactics, right, of guilt and shame, that she believed she was helping me. So I said, "How does this help me?" And she said, "It keeps you on the straight and narrow that leads to life," which was interesting because it sounds like a very religious term. Some of the things that she said already have given me indication that this is a cultural burden, perhaps a legacy burden. The fact that she's so old, the fact that she says, she's been a student of life forever, and she knows the right path, and her wording, right, the straight and narrow that leads to life. And she says, if you don't stay on this path, you won't survive. So I see that she clearly believes that she's saving my life. So I show her appreciation. And then I ask her, "How old do you think I am?" And she says, "You're 10 years old." And so I realize that she's likely protecting at least a 10-year-old. And so I update her and I say, "Actually, I'm 45. And at this point in my visualization, Gertrude sits on the chair and she has this cane. She leans on the cane, and then she puts her hand on her cheek, kind of like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, and she's just like, shocked. And she said, "My lands," which I don't think I personally have ever said in my life. And I smiled at her, and then I pulled up a chair in front of her and sat facing her. And I took her hands in mine, and at that point I noticed that her hands were very frail. They're very wrinkled, and I could see her veins. And I just felt such compassion for her. And I told her, "I appreciate you so much. I appreciate you keeping me safe all these years." And then at that point is when I finally had this urge to ask her what her name was. I said, "I've been calling you Gertrude. Is your name Gertrude?" And she said, "No, it's Edna," which I thought was so funny because they're both these older names, right? But it came like it was coming from another person. It was a very spontaneous, clear, and it's interesting when you receive answers from parts because it almost feels humorous or delightful, right? Like when she said "my lands," or she told me her name was Edna, it just feels, I don't know another word except delightful, kind of humorous. So I hugged her and I felt deep appreciation and love for her. And then I got up and I started to rub her back because I could tell that she was so tired. She'd been working quite hard. And then I asked her, "Is it okay, Edna, if I go to the 10-year-old girl that you're protecting and I learn more about her?" And she nodded, and then she looked up at me and I saw that she was crying. And it seemed like for the first time, her efforts were acknowledged, her good intentions were acknowledged, her hard work was acknowledged, and that someone actually cared about the part that she protected. So I comforted her, and then having her permission, I went to the 10-year-old girl and I asked the 10-year-old to show herself to me. And at that point, this happens sometimes when I think because it's a cultural burden or there's kind of complex trauma, right? Where there's so many incidences that reinforce a burden of a part. There was just this barrage of images, do, this, that. And the very first image was interesting. It was of me and my best friend at the time dressed up with socks on our hands and underwear on our heads and just being playful and funny. So that was the first image. And I tried to record as many images as I could, but they were coming so quickly. So the next one was, I saw myself there, 10 years old, wearing stirrup pants with double socks and a long flowery blouse, which was in style at the time. And a woman from the church was looking down at me with disdain and saying, "Aren't you the pastor's daughter? I don't see how you could possibly be wearing that." And then it switched to an image of me wearing a wide-necked shirt with one shoulder down over a tank top, which was also in at the time. And my aunt telling my mom that she better make me pull that shirt up or people would think I was a slut. Then it switched to seeing myself at school wearing my new suspenders, which I thought was just so cool, but not getting any attention from the boy that I had a crush on. I remember he would always wear suspenders, and I thought that somehow he would like me if I wore suspenders. So at this point, I, as the self, have the realization that Edna seems to be very focused at this point on physical appearance, what I'm wearing, and particularly what other people think of me, and if they accept me or not, or if I'm pleasing them or not. She's kind of more focused on the people in the scene and protecting me from them than on me. So the next image I got was not about what I was wearing, though. It was feeling shame in my 4th grade class, being shamed by my 4th grade teacher. And then the next image was actually being praised by my 5th grade teacher. So the message I'm getting from this 10-year-old is just how much what other people say about her, think about her, feel about her, like how important that is, how that defines her, whether it's good or bad. And then I see my 10-year-old self on the playground playing truth or dare with one of my friends, even though I absolutely hated the game because I was afraid of losing another friend. And if you've watched my very first video, self-therapy, you'll see, I had just had this experience also at 10 of losing my best friend who was critical of me. So this all plays into this same message that other people are not going to accept me unless I do what they want and what they see as good and appropriate. Let's see. The next scene is myself being tested for the gifted and talented education program. And then I see myself participating in academic competitions and science fairs and gaining my identity and my worth there. So it's really interesting. There's just a bunch of different scenes, but it seems like the common thread that she's trying to show me is that her worth came externally, right? And that as long as she pleased the teachers, her peers, the people in front of her, she was okay, but that she was very afraid of being criticized and rejected. And I also sensed that the very first scene where she was dressed up silly with her friend and was just being playful, that this was supposed to represent kind of before she was burdened, that she had these innate qualities of being playful and authentic and being herself. And then the next scene, at the church with the woman looking down at her in disdain was the shift to realizing that people could be judgmental like that and really taking that to heart. So I, in this moment, decided to just focus on that first scene. And so, as many of you know, I do this thing I call time travel, where my current adult self began to walk into that scene to be with the girl that was in the stirrup pants and the double socks. And so I just focused on her and observed her for a little bit. And what I observed was that she was really being pulled in 2 different directions between her peers and her authorities or adults in her life. She wanted to impress her peers by wearing whatever was cool, but then she found herself horrified that the adults thought that was bad somehow. She just didn't know how to please everyone. So I asked her, what do you want? Just feel inside yourself. I encouraged her as the self. What do you prefer to wear? And she said, I like my outfit. I feel beautiful. I feel comfortable. I'm innocent. I don't see what's bad about my outfit. I just want to be free, she said. And I said, I'm curious if you've internalized that it's bad for you to want anything or to do what you want. And she said, oh, yes, I can't trust myself to know what's good or bad. So that was really a big burden, that she couldn't trust herself. She had to abdicate her authority to whether it's her peers or the adults around her. And I said, well, I'm an adult and I think you look adorable. And she smiled. And I said, you really can't get it wrong. It's okay to experiment and to see what makes you happiest. Being yourself and trying new things is never wrong. Your worth does not come from what you wear or what other people think about you. Wear whatever makes you happiest. So then I asked her, if you could wear anything you want, what would you want to wear? And she said, I would dress up like Madonna. I would wear cutout lace gloves and tease out my hair and wear a short skirt and a leather top and high boots and makeup. And I smiled because this would have been seen as, bad by the religious group I grew up in. I said, okay, let's dress you up like that. And we dressed her up and I said, how do you feel? And she said, I feel free. I feel fun. And so I asked her, is there anything that represents your burden of having to please others and the shame and the guilt that you took on? And she said, yes, it's the second pew on the right side of the church. Which is so funny. Again, when I receive these answers from a part, it does not feel like I'm making it up. It feels like I'm receiving it, right? I thought, oh, okay. And then I remembered that's where I would sit in church as a teenager, and a preteen, as old as she was. So I said, you can use one of the elements, water, air, fire, earth, metal, or whatever you'd like to get rid of that pew, that bench in the church. And she said, I'd like to burn it. She said, not the whole church, just that one pew. And then she said, can we burn it and then stick it in the dunking booth that they used to use at the church carnivals? Because I hated that thing. I thought that was so funny. I don't know if you know what a dunking booth is, but it's like this booth where someone sits and there's water underneath, and then people throw balls at a target. And if they hit the target, the person, the bench falls down and the person falls into the water. So she wants to burn the bench and then put it in the dunking booth. So that's what we did. We went out into the parking lot and we built this bonfire and we burned the bench, and then we put whatever was left of it in this dunking booth. And then I asked her, how do you feel now? And she sighed and she said, I feel free. I feel less judgmental, which was really fascinating to me. Often when a part becomes unburdened, you will naturally see their naturally valuable qualities. And her holding all of the shame and the judgment from other people, in turn, made her closed off and judgmental toward other people. And so she said, now I feel like I can embrace others for who they are, for being themselves. I remember judging so many people because of the way they dressed or the way they looked. And now I feel like I can accept them. I can embrace everyone in their unique expression of themselves. So her naturally valuable quality, it seems like, is inclusion and acceptance of everyone. And so I said, that's beautiful. And then I invited Edna to come in and asked her if she had witnessed what happened with the 10-year-old girl she protected. And Edna got up from her chair and she started tap dancing with her cane. And then she stood up straight suddenly. And then she let go of her cane and she smiled and she grabbed the self's hands and started dancing around with me. And I thought, well, I think Edna saw what happened. She seemed pretty happy about it. So then I asked Edna, now that, this one at least is free and you see that the self can help with these parts, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? Because I didn't assume that she was completely, free to do what she wanted, because there were all these other scenes, and later there were many, many more, because this was such an entrenched burden. And she worked very closely with Cassandra, my people pleaser, right? And those two are just, of all my parts, are the ones who have repeatedly shown me, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. There's just so many instances where I got this message that I had to please the people in front of me, or I would be punished, right? Or I would experience the pain of shame. So, but just to give her hope, and hypothetically, I said, what would you want to do? And Edna said, I would like to be the voice of consideration for others. I want to help you care for others, but not at your own expense. I'd like to go from being the mean grandma to the fun grandma. And So it's interesting because in her burden state, she was hyper fixated on what everyone else would want. And then she would criticize me if that didn't fit. If anything I did was out of alignment with what she perceived socially acceptable, her job was to criticize me and shame me to get me in line so that I could survive socially. So now her new role that she would like to have is to still be considerate of other people, but not at my own expense, right? To be able to care about other people, but not care about what they think of me. And then, so just, an update going forward, there were many more of those scenes that I went back to and unburdened those parts and redid them and loved on those parts from the self and retrieved them. And at that point, it was really interesting because I would go into my system and every day, and I would usually bring my parts to some wide open space and kind of just see how they were doing. And I would notice that Edna loved to be with the exiled children in my system, and she loved to play with them. And she was often making them homemade cookies and kind of being the fun grandma, which was really interesting to observe. And then one final note about this. So Edna, I learned, was just one of the critics in my system. I have so far met 4 main critics, and really any part can be critical at times, so I can have critical energy, but 4 really big critics that they have a different focus, but they have a different thing that they're kind of hyper fixated on, like a narrow vision of, if you do this, I have to criticize you because it could get you in trouble in some way. And a protector's motto is never again. Never want that to happen again. So, and a lot of them were reinforced repeatedly, right, through social upbringing, through religion, and through very specific traumatic experiences. So, unburdening our inner critics can be such an incredibly powerful and freeing and healing thing for our inner family and for our inner system. It can allow us to show up in the world in a completely different way. So I encourage you, if you have an inner critic or 2 or 3 or 4, to really get curious about them and talk to them. And if you have any questions about what I've shared, feel free to leave them in the comments below.